Hello, advanced social psychology students. Welcome to Unit 3, Module 12, Chapter 7, Liking and Loving video. Okay, this video is not going to be that long because I want to make sure that you watch a video that Dr. John Gottman created. It's his lecture. He is a phenomenal research that does research on loving and relationships. He started from a very empirical basis, and he'll explain in his it's almost a hour long. It's like 48-minute long video. And in his lecture video, he talks about how he did the research, how he conducted it. But it's a very data-driven research to try to understand what leads couples to stay together. Basically of the liking and loving side, it's the loving side. And he's a phenomenal researcher who has done a lot of great work. And so it's really important to me that you watch that video that's almost an hour long so that you can really learn about his research. And he'll talk in it about the four apocalypse, the four predictors that a marriage is in real trouble and likely to divorce in the next year or so. And he also talks about the 7 building blocks to a great marriage. It doesn't necessarily have to be a marriage, but a great loving relationship, significant relationship with another human being. So it's great information, very scientifically based. And so I really want you to watch that video. So I'm going to go through the rest of the information that I want you to know as quickly as I can so that you can have enough time to watch that video. All right, let me call up the PowerPoint slides for this chapter, and the chapter on liking and loving. And so when we talk about liking and loving, it all begins with initial attraction, right? At first, you have to initially be attracted to someone. After you're initially attracted to them, then you develop the relationship. Now you've got this social connectedness or a loving relationship. But at the beginning, it's attraction. So there's 2 like really old, not that great theories of initial attraction. And I tell you about them because you really should know them if you've had a class in social psychology. But sometimes I think sitting in a lunchroom in a high school, listening to the high schoolers talk, I think they have better theories about who's attracted to who and why than some of this. So these are 2 very simplistic theories. So these are not involved. They're not the theories we talk of today. They're sort of like old theories from before, but they're sort of where we started. And again, something you should know if you've had a graduate level course in social psychology. So the first is social exchange theory. And social exchange theory basically says that whenever you're in a relationship with someone, they cost you some things, but there's also rewards for being with them. So they might cost you time. They might cost you money if you're actually paying for going to dinner with them. And so there's certain costs associated with them, but there's also rewards associated with being them. If you find them really funny, then being with someone who's entertaining is very rewarding. If they're physically attractive and it feels good for you to be seen in town with someone who's physically attractive, that can be very rewarding. So social exchange theory basically says that we're selfish monsters. No, what it says is that we are initially attracted to people who give us lots and lots of rewards and cost us very little. So of all the people that we meet, who are we going to be most attracted to? The people who give us the most rewards, costing us the least. That ratio of rewards to cost is as low as possible. Rewards to cost as high as possible. Okay. Now, equity theory came along saying, so social exchange theory, if you're right, then I should be in a relationship. I should be very happy in a relationship where I'm getting a whole bunch and not much is expected of me. But almost all of us have been in a relationship like that, where we kind of know the other person's more into it than we are, and we're getting a lot of our needs met, and we're not having to do that much. According to social exchange theory, that should be like the bomb. But have you been in one of those? Does it feel good? Most of us are kind of like, oh, that's kind of icky. There's something wrong here. So equity theory sort of took off of that. And it says that really our ideal relationships are relationships where our reward to cost ratio matches the other person's reward to cost ratio. So if we're getting a lot in the relationship and we don't have to give that much, the other person we know is getting a lot and not having to give that much too. If it's costing us a lot and we're getting a lot, then the other person, it's either that same ratio of it's costing them a lot and they're getting a lot, or it's not costing them that much, but they're not getting that much. As long as that ratio is equal, those are the relationships that we should like the most. Okay, enough theories since the theories aren't that great. But what we do have really good research on is who do we like? What are the characteristics of the people that we like? So, and your book does a great job going through a lot of these too. Who do we like? We like people who like us. We call it reciprocity. They reciprocate in our feelings. We like people who like us, especially if the person didn't like us at first. So there's an interesting study done by Aaron and I forget who else, Anderson, and someone else. And it's pretty old now, but it's a goodie nonetheless. And in the research, you had to work with someone. You think it's another person, but really it's a Confederate. You worked with them on a task for 8 hours. And at the end of every hour, the person talks to the experimenter and gives an assessment on how you're doing and basically whether or not they like you. And you're led to believe that you're overhearing this, that you're able to hear what she's saying because the intercom is left on, but in reality it's left on purposely and you're supposed to hear it, but you're supposed to think that you're hearing it even though you're not supposed to be hearing it. And the experiment goes on for 8 hours, and at the end of each hour you get to hear this person's assessment of you. And in one of the conditions, the person's always super positive about you. In another condition, they're always super negative about you. So we know, because we like people who like us, that the person is going to like the Confederate. At the end of the study, you're asked, so how much do you like the person? How much would you like to work with them again? Yada, yada, with the Confederate. So and you don't know they're the Confederate, but obviously the people who are in the condition where the person said glowing wonderful things about them all day, they like that person more than the people who are with someone who said terrible things about them all 8 hours of the day. But what was interesting is the researchers thought that if the Confederates started talking positively about the person and then went negative, so the first 4 were kind of positive and the last 4 were kind of negative, or started the first 4 negative and then went positive, that those would be in the middle, because after all, they sort of average into somewhat liking. So you'd have, if they like you, you like them the most. If they kind of like you, kind of don't like you, then you like them in the middle. And if they never liked you, you like them the least. But that's not what the research found. In fact, what they found is the people who didn't like you at first, but then did like you, we liked them the most by far. We like people who like us, especially people who didn't like us at first. And then came the person who was always positive. Then was the person who was always negative, and we loathe the person who liked us at the beginning and then turned on us and didn't like us anymore. When you start out positive and then go negative, we can't stand those people. So we like people who like us, especially if they didn't like us at first. Okay, so reciprocity. And you might think about that for a little bit. Because I mean, I just told you that study, it's an oldie and a goodie, and it's good to know. And you're kind of like, yeah, another fact for me to learn. But try to apply it to your real life. So I think I've told you how for over a decade I was chair of the psychology department. And when we went to interview people and we'd bring them on campus, we'd have dinner with them at night and then hang out with them for a whole day. And it was important to me that they knew that we liked them, because then they would like us, so they'd take the job. But if we liked them too much, And we were just saying how wonderful they were, how wonderful they were. And then once they started working here, maybe it wasn't as quickly the good fit that we hoped it would be. And I had to have them in my office saying, the students are finding you disorganized, you need to blah, 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 blah. That might seem like I went from positive to negative, and then they would loathe me and really quit. And they could quit in the middle of a semester and really leave students and me in the lurch. So it's this interesting thing where when you're interviewing someone for a job and you don't know how they're really going to work out, you don't want to be so positive that then it's going to go negative and they're going to loathe you. But you also can't do the best of acting as though you don't like them. And then when they come, oh, look at how great you are. Because if you act as though you don't like them, they won't come in the first place. So it's kind of tricky, but that reciprocity does play a role. Then we like people who are similar to us. Your book talks about this, and your book talks about some of the limitations of this. We like people who are similar to us unless our sense of uniqueness is threatened or unless they are socially undesirable, and if they're similar on things that aren't very important to us. But I'm going to kind of seem to talk out of the other side of my mouth. If we don't know anything else, then even similarity on things that aren't that important to us will lead to attraction. So the first day of class, if you find out that you share a birthday with someone, even though, like, who cares when your birthday is, but finding out you share a birthday with someone will lead you to like that person. That similarity leads to attraction. Now, but normally sharing a birthday with someone isn't going to make you more attracted to them, but it will if you don't have any other information. So, okay, so similarity leads to attraction. Proximity, people that we see a lot will lead to attraction. Your book talks about this. We explain this with the mere exposure effect. If I show you letters of the Chinese alphabet, and I have one student memorize one letter and another student memorize a different letter and a third student memorize a third letter, and you memorize it, and then I have you come back 6 months later. Do you remember the letter, Chinese alphabet letter I had you memorize? Here are all the list of letters. Can you recall? Can you recognize, point out the one that you, Okay, well, tell me which of these Chinese alphabet characters you think is the most aesthetically pleasing. And each person will choose the letter that they can't recall it, they can't recognize it, but the letter that they initially memorized would be the one that they'll find the most aesthetically pleasing. So there's this thing about when we get exposed to something, it becomes more attractive to us, not just people. And so people we see a lot, we tend to be we find them more attractive. We also are attracted to people who are physically attractive, and your book does a really good job explaining all of that. And remember, physical attractiveness in the areas that are universal. So not like a really long neck that just one tribe might really say that's important, or at a specific period of time, very small feet were seen in I think it was the Japanese or the Chinese culture as being very beautiful. So not these culturally induced things, but there are like the hip to waist ratio is a thing that across all times, across all cultures, people find women attractive who have a specific hip to waist ratio. The things that are across culture and across time that make someone physically attractive, like symmetry in their face, like the hip to waist ratio, those things are also associated with health. So from an evolutionary perspective, things that may cues to our health and our ability to reproduce lead us to be more physically attractive. And if you're physically attractive, people are more attracted to you. Also, we are more attracted to people who have helped us in the past. I mean, after all, they were a nice person. Maybe there's a bit of reciprocity here. If they helped us, they must have liked us. And if they liked us that much, then we like them back. Or maybe they helped us and then we're like, well, what a good person. They're the kind of person who help people. And so we like them because they're a helpful type person. What's really interesting is we like people that we have helped. And the only way that people, or one of the main ways that people make sense of this is cognitive dissonance theory. So if you just help someone and you don't like them, why on earth did you just spend all that time helping them? You should be in a negative state of physical arousal. Remember that we call dissonance. And according to Fessinger, that dissonance is associated with the motivation to get rid of the dissonance. And one way you can get rid of the dissonance is to change your attitude. And so if you decide, I do like them, then everything's rosy. Of course you help them. Because you like them. So people that we've helped, we're more attracted to. And lastly, we like people who are associated with things we like. So, okay, I love ice cream. If I see you at Brahms, I'm going to be attracted to you because you're associated now with this thing that I love, a nice, good ice cream cone. People like their classmates better in a class that they have a higher GPA in. If your average is higher in a class, you tend to like the classmates better. So we like people who are associated with things that we like. So it's a big, long list here of things that lead to that initial attraction. Now, after you have that initial attraction, it has to develop into more of a social relationship, into a social connection. And these social connections are so important. I don't have a slide that can do this justice, but there is so much research now. There's even a great TED Talk that you can watch about a woman. It was a huge, big longitudinal study. I believe it was at Harvard, and it focused on centenarians, people who lived to be 100 or older. And it looked to see what were the best predictors of these people. And of course, like we know, like, don't be overweight, make sure you take your flu shot, make sure you regularly exercise. Like we have these ideas of things that lead to a long health span. But oh my goodness, the number one and the first two, more important, better, the most important number one and number two predictors, higher than a flu shot, higher than exercising, higher than not being obese, both had to do with social connectedness. They had to do with having basically having a very close, significant person that you loved that loved you back, where you had their back and they had your back. But another one of the other in the top two was this sense of social connectedness in your community where you lived. In other words, these were not deep relationships, but they were a lot of more superficial relationships. If you didn't show up at the grocery store for 2 weeks, when you did come back, did someone say, hey, we missed you. Where were you for the last couple of weeks? These superficial relationships, but that our relationships where we're socially connected, the more of those we have, they're a predictor of us living to be 100 years old and longer. So this is really important. And social connectedness is also very related to our happiness. And the more social connectedness you have, the happier you are. There's a very strong positive correlation between these two things. Now, why is social connectedness? Why does it lead to happiness? Why is it so important? Well, from an evolutionary basis, we should have a drive to form and preserve social bonds because that's what kept us alive from an evolutionary perspective, right? If a tiger came, if we could all fight against the tiger, we're going to be more likely to live. I'll be less likely to die. If we're all going to help to gather food, if we're all going to help to kill the tiger so we can eat the tiger, we're going to be more likely to live. So there's definitely an evolutionary basis for us to we're motivated to form and preserve social bonds. So people who are doing those are meeting their evolutionary needs, so to speak, and so they should be more happy. But also, there's a lot of social support when you are connected with other people. And some of it is just very practical, just very tangible. Like if you need a ride to the airport, do you have a friend that you can call who will give you a ride to the airport? How about if would they give you a ride at the airport at 8 in the morning or at 5 in the morning or at 1 in the morning? How long would they drive you to the Lawton Airport, which is just 15 minutes away? Or will they drive you all the way an hour and 15 minutes to the Oklahoma City Airport or something like that? So having social support can take care of some of our needs, like getting us a ride to the airport. And the closer we are to some people, the more likely they are to give us even that much more. They'll drive even further for us. If we're short on money, will they give us a loan? Tangible things that you need, right? Then also, of course, the emotional support you get from someone. You're really upset and frustrated. Can you vent to someone? People that we're socially connected to, we can vent to them. When we're so excited, we just found out we got promoted or something, to have someone to call and share in your happiness. You just found out you're pregnant, and you're ecstatic out of your mind. So you want to call someone and go, do you have someone that you can call that you're like, guess what? I'm pregnant. And you can share your excitement with them. And then, when you're grieving, is there someone that you can cry to? So the emotional support is so important. And then last, information. Oh my goodness, social support includes informational support. You lose your job or your kid loses their job. Do you have a friend you can call? Do you know if anyone is hiring right now? My kid can do this, this, and this. Do you have anything? And the more socially connected you are, the more likely you are to know someone who can at least get your kid an interview that might lead to another interview that leads them to getting a job. Information is key. We know this. So I think during the pandemic, when a lot of us were forced to isolate, we learned how much social connectedness led to our happiness. Does that make sense? So I think we all know that the people that we're really close with, the few people that are in our inner circle, we know how important that is. But during the pandemic, some of us were still living with those people, but they were not able to have the social connectedness with the more superficial relationships, the friendships, but not the super deep ones. And boy, it was hard. People got really lonely and isolated. Even people who were living with 3 other people in their home, but they still felt lonely and isolated without that social connectedness. There was still some social connectedness with the people they were living with, but with people and some people were completely alone and socially isolated. So that social support is so important. And social connectedness has less hedonic adaptation than some other things that lead to happiness. So for example, let's just look at the happiness literature with money, for example. If you don't have enough money where you don't know where you're sleeping tonight, you don't know how you're going to get food and you're hungry, you don't know how you're going to be safe, then having more money is going to make you more happy. And the more money you have, the more happy you're going to be up until a point. Once you have a house, you're renting a place or an apartment, but once you have a safe space that you can live in, and it's going to be there tomorrow too, and you have enough money to feed yourself, and you have enough money, like in our culture, to be able to have a reliable mode of transportation to get you to work or wherever you need to go, to get you to see your kids or whatever. Once you have enough money to get those needs met, then more money doesn't lead to more happiness. So it kind of works like if this is happiness and this is money, more and more helps, and then it levels off. Well, why does it level off? Well, we call it hedonic adaptation, where once you have enough money, then you still think that you want money, because like once you have a car, let's say you have a car and you have a nice house. Well, you look in the neighborhood and the neighbors have nicer cars. So now you want a nicer car. But that nicer car makes you feel good once you buy a new one. The nicer car makes you feel good for a very short period of time, but then it's just still a car that you still have to clean and vacuum out and everything else. Same with the house. Like you want a nicer house, so you move to a nicer neighborhood with a bigger house. And for a little bit, it's like that gives you a little bump of happiness. But then that's just the house that you live in now. And there's more to clean and more to vacuum and more and so you adapt to this like better way of life. And so it doesn't lead to more happiness for long. So more money will lead to more happiness until your needs are met, and then it just levels out. You might for a minute get a little blip because you bought a new house, or a little blip because you bought a new car, but then it goes back to just being ordinary. That is not true with social connectedness. The more connected we are, the more happy we are, and the more we are, the more we are, the more we are, and it just goes on. I mean, at some point, you run out of time to be connected to anyone else. So there might be like a time constraint here. But basically, the more connected you are to the more people and the deeper these connections, the happier you are. And so it's really kind of cool. Now, I want to spend some time, and I know I'm going on long and I wanted to keep this short, but I want to spend some time talking about the opposite of social connectedness. And I'm saying opposite, that's not really the right way to talk about it. But if you're going to be attracted to people, that initial attraction, and then you're going to take that initial attraction and turn it into social connectedness, at some point, you're likely to feel rejected. At some point, you're going to like someone better than they like you. At some point, we call it the porcupine problem, right? And like porcupines are really, really cold. What are they going to do? Well, they need to huddle together in order to stay warm and comfort one another. But when porcupines huddle really close together, their little porcupines prick one another and it hurts. And so human relationships, even though social connectedness is so valuable and instrumental for us to be happy, and the tangible advantages to it, and the emotional advantages to it, and the informational advantages to it, still being, human relationships tend to be messy and you can get hurt and you can be rejected socially. And so I think it's good for you to be familiar with Baumeister's research on social rejection. And so I want to give you an idea of how he does his research. In one of he sets up situations where he's going to make people feel rejected. So in one set of his experiments, he had this group acquaintance task. So you attend a meeting in which you're introduced to 5 other, let's say Cameron University students, and you spend about 20 minutes getting to know one another. Next, you and each of the other students are brought to separate cubicles, and a group facilitator comes in to the cubicle and says to you, "We are interested in forming groups in which members like and respect each other. Please name 2 people out of the people you just met." Remember, you just spent 20 minutes talking with people. Pick 2 of the people that you just met that you would most like to work with. Okay, so you write your 2 names down and you give it to the group facilitator. And then the group facilitator comes back to you a few minutes later. And he either tells you that the groups will not be formed as usual because nobody selected you to be in their group. So you're going to work alone. Or you're told in the other, so that's the rejection condition. Or you're told the groups will not be formed as usual because everyone selected you to be in their group, and we don't want other groups to feel slighted because they didn't get you. So you either get this rejection, or there's sometimes a control group too. We decided not to form the groups as usual because there was lots of overlap or something. So you're not given any information, but this is how they look at being rejected versus neutral information versus super accepted, like people liked you a lot. Another example, you're given the opportunity to interact with a potential employer, first by sending videotaped messages to one another and then face to face. You watch a 3-minute video made by a potential employer in which the employer discusses the ideal employee. After viewing the video, you make a 3-minute video describing the type of employer that you would like to work for. 10 minutes later, you're informed that after watching your video, the potential employer left suddenly because he didn't want to meet you. So that's the rejection thing. In the other condition, I think there said he had to leave because he had an emergency, but he's going to try to meet with you later. So you have this being rejected versus not rejected. And these are just two examples of the different rejection paradigms. But I wanted you to get the sense of what we mean by rejection. And what Baumeister has found over and over and over again is after people get rejected, they're very motivated to restore social bonds. They have decreased sensitivity and decreased self-regulation. So let's talk about what we mean. And these are all different studies that were run. After you've been rejected, you almost want to prove to yourself that you are likable and that other people would want to be your friend. So you rate strangers more positively. I mean, everyone rates them over 4 on a 1 to 7 scale, but you go even more. You're going to be above 4 and even sometimes close to 5. You're more likely to donate money to a student emergency fund. You're going to rate other people as nicer, friendlier, and more desirable. You're more likely to say, yes, I'll volunteer to participate in an experiment. If someone dropped pencils in front of you, they make it so it's a Confederate, obviously. You're more likely to stop and help someone pick up the pencils. In an experiment that involves cooperation, you cooperate more. When we ask you how motivated you are to meet new friends, you rate that you're much more motivated to meet new friends. Also, if we say, if you'll stay in the experiment for 15 minutes longer, you can meet some new people, you're more likely to hang around and wait for these people. You prefer to perform tasks with others rather than alone, and you prefer to be with others rather than alone. These are all different experiments that Baumeister has run. So you can see that after we're rejected, it's almost like we're like now really motivated to make more friends. Since we're like losing one, even if it's a weak social connectedness type thing, we're going to make some more social connections. Another thing that happens, though, is that we have a decrease in our sensitivity. So what I want to do is talk about this more from a physiological point of view. If you break your leg, your body will create some, I don't know if they're called endorphins, but it will create some natural painkillers because, your body's sort of in shock with all this pain. What ends up happening, and so your body will numb itself to some extent. What ends up happening emotionally is when you are emotionally hurt, like rejected, our body seems to send off those same things. So we become more numb. We become less sensitive. And so what we find is, and less sensitive physically and also emotionally. So after someone's been rejected, they're less sensitive to pain. So if I put their finger or their thumb in this pressure device that squeezes their thumb, they can take much more squeezing than someone who hasn't been rejected. They can hold their hand in ice cold water longer than someone who hasn't been rejected. They're less sensitive to pain. They can tolerate more pain. When if you give them good news, it's almost like they've numbed out a little. If you give them really good news, they're not as elated. If you give them bad news, they're not as depressed. They show less empathy toward other people, less empathy toward, in general, less empathy toward someone who broke their leg, less likely to express their emotions, sort of like they've numbed out, less empathy towards someone who their girlfriend or boyfriend just broke up with them. So we find this like decreased sensitivity, this like numbness that comes with physical pain, but it comes with this emotional pain too. So we get this like numbness, but then this strong desire to meet new people and make new friends. But remember, when you're meeting these new people and you're being more helpful and you're cooperating more, but you're less empathetic and you're less likely to show your emotions and you're not as affected by good or bad news, it's going to be almost harder for you to make these connections. And the last thing is you have some decreased self-regulation. You're going to almost act like someone who has ADHD, even if you don't. So this comes with distorted perceptions of time, but you're less likely to look in the mirror. Isn't that kind of odd? You'll spend less time solving a difficult problem. It's like once it's hard, you're like, I quit. You're more likely to perform self-destructive behaviors. So if you're on a diet, you're going to eat more cookies. If you're trying to stop smoking, you smoke more. You show less self-control with trouble paying attention. if we give you a drink and we tell you, even though this doesn't taste very good, if you finish the whole thing, it's going to have all these health benefits. You'll drink much less of it. I've already talked about eating more cookies. You also take more risks. So this idea, like the way we can regulate our emotions well and, have lots of self-control and pay attention when we need to and drink things that taste bad if they're going to make us healthy and not eat cookies if we're on a diet, if we know that we need to lose weight. All of these, like spending a lot of time and focus solving problems, even when they're difficult, all of these things we are less able to do after we've been rejected. So this is some really important stuff that I wanted you to be aware of, especially if you're a parent and your kid is going through a breakup. I mean, if they're breaking up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, all of these things are likely to happen. And if you've got a roommate right now, if you're in school and they just got dumped by their boyfriend or girlfriend, again, this is how they're likely to feel. How can we become more socially connected? Well, there's quite a bit of research on this, and this is all very self-explanatory, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. I want you to look at these slides yourself. But there's some great strategies for making friends. Be supportive and loyal. Some research by Argyle and Henderson. It's really old, but it's good. Stand up for your friends when they're not there. Keep secrets. Don't put down their other friends. Reciprocate favors. If they help you, you help them. Rejoice in others' triumphs. If you press this link, you'll get to listen to Martin Seligman. He's also often called the father of positive psychology. He's got great things about how important it is to rejoice in the great things that happen to another person. Hugs. Pennsylvania State University students found that giving or receiving 5 hugs each day, they had to do it for 4 weeks, and they were much more happy. So hugging seems to play a big role. Making time. And I know you, as a graduate student, you are very busy, or at least I was incredibly busy when I was a graduate student. And my daughter, who's working on her PhD right now at UC Berkeley, oh, she's so busy. But if you don't make time for the social connectedness, you're not going to be able to have friends. Friends take time. A significant other takes time. Successful couples spend 5 hours or more per week together talking. That's almost an hour a day. Do you have an hour a day to spend with your spouse? I mean, I'm retired now, I do. But I mean, that can be really, really tricky. But you want to do that in order to keep that relationship alive. Spending 5 minutes every day expressing appreciation or gratitude for particular behaviors can really lead to higher levels of happiness and more social connectedness. And so here's some other things you can do: expressing admiration, appreciation, and affection. And I guess, is that the last slide? Yes, it is. So you can read through these things. Okay, that is all I'm going to talk about. Oh, no, there's one more thing I need you to know. In section 7.2 of your textbook, I want to make sure that you know Sternberg's triangular theory of love. It's not that it's that deep or anything, but if you've had a class in social psychology and you've got a master's degree, people are going to expect that you at least have heard of Sternberg's triangular theory of love. He basically says that there's all these different types of love, and it all has to do with 3 basic types. And so, do you have only one of them? Do you have only 2 of them? Which 2 do you have, or do you have all 3 of them? And so look at that section 7.2 of the text. Really, it's important to me that you know the triangular theory of love. But what I really want you to spend your time doing is listening to Gottman's video. And the great thing about his video is he doesn't have very many visuals for it. It's basically a lecture. And so you could listen to it as you're walking or exercising or driving, because you don't really have to look at it. You just need to listen to it. It's almost an hour long, but it's great and chock full with really great information that's empirically based. Okay, we'll see you next week.